case if okay, that's fine. So in case anyone wants the presentation as we're going along, well, you already have it, so that should be quite useful as long as it uploads. So it's just uploading now. Hopefully that sorts itself out. But we are going to be talking about presenting your project, which is all about sort of like these very, very practical ideas about setting up, how you want to present your ideas, how you want to present your projects. And so we're going to talk about sort of 4 very basics: the context in which you're sort of doing your projects, font and type as a general rule, blocking and spacing, and then sort of gauging your design based off of the design of your poster based off of the content itself and what you're trying to express. And that is ready. So I'm just going to send that through. Perfect. There we go. So that's sorted. Now, the basics of, I was sort of drilled this in fine art school of you need to learn the rules first. You need to learn them very, very, very well. And only then can you really start thinking about breaking them. So this is sort of the essentials of if you want to present a good, concise design project, or these are the general rules that you should be following to make it a lot easier for yourself and a lot easier for the person who's reading it. So we'll talk about your project first. It's all about being really consistent, clear, and communicating your idea. That's the basic premise for now. This isn't graphic design. This isn't sort of the very aesthetic version of a poster. This is you have a design project or you have a design idea or a service, and you need to communicate it really effectively. And you need to be very, very clear about what your solution is. Because oftentimes you're presenting either to a panel, you're presenting to judges, you're presenting to scholarship funds, or you're presenting to clients. And they want to know right off the bat, what is the solution? What does it look like? And if need be, what is the supporting text on it? So this is an example sort of what good graphic design is, in the sense that it's giving you sort of a feeling. There's no clear answer to what's going on, but it's clearly something about food. It's got sort of a location, it's got the address, and it's giving you the vibes that you should be expecting from this event. So it's all about the essence of the experience. They're showing really graphic and simple elements. They're putting a push on this sort of teaser about what to expect, what are the colors, what are the aesthetics, what are the styles, and it's meant to entice you. So it's not meant to give you the exact answer of this is exactly what you will find at this event, but it's sort of a way of getting you in. And it's really centered sort of on marketing in this way of trying to sell this beautiful idea so that you can go to the conference, essentially. And there's a big difference, just graphically, between something on the left that we saw, that poster about sort of the experience, and then aesthetically, there's something very different about this poster. And they have 2 very different ways of enticing people. They have 2 different essences. You can see, almost instinctively that these are 2 very different kind of people that they're trying to attract or that they're trying to entice. But when it comes to your project, it's all about efficiently explaining and showcasing a solution. So it's being very, very clear right off the bat. As an example, these are sort of some of the things that you should be looking for. Either on the left, you have this nice big beauty shot, and you have very clearly the title of the project. And then if you have a lot of text, then you're adding it sort of there. Or on the left-hand side, no, right. I think the right-hand side for you. On the right, you have one big image again, and then you might have some smaller details, and then you have a little bit less text. It's just doing a quick explanation, and then it has the title there. So it's really, really clear and concise and simple. It's on a white background. It's on black font. It's very, very simple. And as an example, this is what it can sort of look like. On the left-hand side, you clearly know what the product is, and you can start understanding what it's about and where it's used, what kind of context you're trying to appeal to, and it doesn't need a million other photos. Whereas on the right-hand side, you have that beauty shot explaining exactly what kind of context it lives in, and then you have some more different details that come and complement those images. So it's really, they hold themselves together and they give information. And you can already have a really good idea of the project without even having to read the descriptions, which is what you should be focusing on and what you really should be trying to sell as your first priority. So if we look at this one, you can clearly see that it's really describing a solution, and it's very instinctive. You know what it is without having to read the description, without even having a title of the project. You know, the title is title of the project, and you know it's benches, you know that there's wood, you know that there's sort of a modular effect, you know that there's something about the construction. So you can clearly see that there's these aspects of it that we're trying to showcase, and these selling points that you can see through the images. There are different levels of detail as well. You have, you know, that big beauty shot does have the context of a city, as you can see from the background, you know, where it is on the street. Then you have the product itself, and then you have the people. So you have an idea of the scale, you have an idea of this general, you know, view of it, but then afterwards you have different sort of levels of detail in the other photos. It's always very solution focused. So you're trying to sell, you know, it's not about telling a story with a sort of lofty introduction and sort of, you know, the development as it goes on in a movie with like sort of the shock at the end, and then you have, you know, this conclusion. You want to see the conclusion from the beginning, and from there, if we're interested, and you should be, then they'll look at sort of the development phases and other aspects of it that came before that. I cannot stress the next point more about you need sort of a human scale. And that is so important in design. When you make images or you do sketches or you design products and there's no human involved, then it could be any size, it could be any scale. There's no real connection to people. But in most cases, when it comes to this kind of design, when it comes to product design, industrial design, or oftentimes, you know, design thinking has to do with a service or a product, there is a human involved. It's this very close interaction, and that's sort of what we work on as designers, and that needs to really come out in what you're trying to explain. And then finally, when it comes to the actual design of the poster, you need to let things breathe. Things need space, things need, you know, margins and lots of room between, you know, blank spaces are really well received when it comes to looking at a poster. If there's too many images or there's too many, you know, titles or text and there's not a good enough hierarchy, then it's creating a really confusing thing to manage for you as the designer of the poster. But then it's also equally as confusing, if not more confusing, for the person viewing it. So if I don't know what to look at and there's so much to look at, I can easily get overwhelmed and disinterested. And no matter how good your idea is, if I don't want to look at it, then how am I sort of adopting it, or how am I enjoying it? And as much as, you know, this is sort of like one of those little pro tips of no matter what, when it comes to when you're doing a submission, let's say for U101, for any course, really, they may not assess you on the, you know, quality of sort of these finishes and these like beautiful end results or the way that you've graphically presented it, but it does obviously have an influence. I mean, most of the ALs are either designers or practicing designers, or they come from that kind of background. And so they have an affinity to things that look beautiful, things that are well presented. And no matter how much that doesn't affect the grade, it still affects the feeling you have while you're grading. So it's something to keep in mind when you want to do well. So moving on to font and type. This is something that you probably already know, but I think it's really important to sort of bring it home. Again, I'm going to say this every time. It's about consistency, clarity, and communication. You know, you want to be as effective as possible, as clear as possible, as consistent as possible. So as a starting point, there's two types of main font. There's serif and sans serif. The differences are that serif has these sort of little legs on the end, whereas sans serif doesn't. Now, serif started, you know, it's really prominent in print because these little legs sort of create this invisible line so that it's quite fast and a lot easier for the reader to go through the lines and keep a consistent view, you know, of reading through this text and knowing, you know, which line they're on and which line they next need to go to. So there's some examples like Times New Roman, Times, Charter, and American Typewriter. Those are some of the more popular ones. But then you also have sans serif, and that is really useful and really popular in screens or on, like on mobile devices, on computer screens. And that's because it's a lot cleaner when it comes to the image quality, and it's also quite a bit faster to download in most of the time. I know that we have such high-speed internet that like it doesn't really show that much anymore, but it's a lot more effective in terms of screen because you have these sort of pixels per inch. And depending on the quality of the screen that you have, or depending on the size that you're working with, those little legs don't really come out as well, and they're more of a distraction when you're reading. So sans serif is the way to go when it comes to screens, or when it comes to putting something on, like a mobile or technological device. Some of the big players, I say players as though they're like in a hockey team, but some of the big players are obviously Helvetica Neue, Arial, and Calibri. And then there's some other ones like Tahoma. You can go on to Google Fonts, and there's things like Lato. But the biggest point is that when it comes to producing design projects or design outcomes or design posters, sans serif is always the way to go. It is the sort of not just trendy type of font to go with. It's the popular one. It's the prominent one. It's clarity and sort of ease of, it's not distracting. Just how we talked about the images need to take the forefront, the text sort of sits in the background, and this is a really good way of also having it sort of sit back because it doesn't have so much visual obstructions. It's not creating so much of a like block. So when it comes to designing your posters, always go for sans serif. For now, again, it's about learning the rules. Afterwards, you can break them once you're very good at doing posters. But for now, focus on sans serif. And Arial and Helvetica Neue are sort of the very, very trendy ones. Calibri is quite good, but it doesn't come out all that well in bigger types. So when you put it in bold, it kind of starts to look like Comic Sans, which, I mean, it goes without saying, never use Comic Sans for like the love of whichever god. But never use Comic Sans. So just focus on Helvetica Neue and Arial. Now, to give sort of an example, we're going to take the poster that we looked at the first time, and looking in a little bit closer, you'll put the title. You want to stick to sort of 3 types of either font or style. So, no, you want to stick to one font. So in this case, it's Helvetica Neue. And then you have one style, which is the title in 40 bold. And then you have the subtitles in 24 bold. But then the body itself is in 24 as well, but not in bold. And that's sort of to create enough clarity and consistency and hierarchy in saying, okay, well, obviously this is the title because it's the biggest thing. That's the first thing you want to look at. But then to help structure your views, you have all of this text. And the only way to organize it a little bit better is to have sort of these subtitles and then the body. One of the things, all the answers are sort of there, but you want to think about the fact that the titles and subtitles should sit on a single line. You shouldn't have, 2 or 3 lines of title because that's just distracting. Unless, of course, you learn the rules very well, and then you can have a title that takes up, 2 lines because it's just cute and trendy. But really, for now, focus on, having a single line. And when it comes to creating new paragraphs and creating new divisions, don't enter. So, use the sort of like return bar. Don't press that twice because that creates a division that isn't very fluid. So you'll notice that when it comes to well-designed images is that they don't do an enter. Instead, they're using line spacing functions to put in these consistent different points, point spacing between each section. Then you, like I said, don't want to use more than one font and 3 different variations of sort of the sizes or boldness of the font. And because it just becomes really distracting. Then when it comes to lines itself in a paragraph, you want to try to focus on having between 8 and 14 words per line in a paragraph, or in sort of a block. Because if you have less than that, let's say you have 5 words per line, it really cuts the flow for the reader. So you kind of have trouble remembering what the last line was, and you spend so much time trying to keep track of where you are in the text that you lose focus on what the actual subject is or what the goal of what is written is. So try to stick between 8 and 14 words. As I said, any less disrupts the flow, and then any longer than that starts to feel like an actual text, like a print document. And that's not what you want to do either. When it comes to a poster, you want to be quick and easy, very simple, very fast, and a very sort of efficient way of giving that information very quickly. And if you have 20 words per line, all of a sudden this is sort of a romance novel, and that's not what you're trying to design. That's not what you're trying to communicate. Then when it comes to the actual alignment, so I'm going to go into the next one just so you have sort of a view of this. Now, this is in Keynote. It's all the same functions in PowerPoint, but it's just to show you, you want to use right align. Don't use justify, which is when all of the words sort of blend and then you have that sort of straight block, because that creates it automates the spacing, which makes it so that different words are sort of glued together or really spaced out. And that, again, it's all about the flow and the consistency. And if you have trouble reading because you don't know where you are and the lines are at different places, the spacing is different, the way that they're structured is all over the place, then again, the person isn't going to be interested, so they're not going to want to read it, and you've lost either a potential client or a potential panelist or a judge or an evaluator, and that's not what you want. You want to be very clean and consistent and have them really attracted to your project. And then finally, this one is like a big one. So don't do like I presented at the end of all of these paragraphs. You want to avoid these dangling words at the end of a paragraph. They break the flow and they ruin the way that you're structuring your sentences. So as someone's reading, they have that obvious flow of words and the way that their intonation throughout the sentence. But if you have just one dangling word at the end, it stops it a bit too quick. And that makes it sort of, again, disruptive, and that's not what you want. So try to avoid that as much as possible. And I mean, truth be told, aesthetically, it's not that cute either. You want to try to bring it back in with the paragraph. And in French, I'm not sure what it's called in English, but in French, they're called orphelins, which is orphans, which isn't a very great way of saying it, but it's the idea that, it's sort of that last one that's been, sent to the orphanage, it's on its own. So when it comes to what all of these rules look like in the formatting tools. So this again is Keynote. You've got the fonts, then you've got the types and the sizes. And then when it comes to text color, again, stick to black. For now, stick to black, or at the very worst, like if you need something to be a little less prominent, then go with like a dark gray or like a medium gray, but stick to that color palette for now. Like don't go wild with the colors, don't go wild with the font. You want to keep everything, like I said, right aligned. It's easier for you. So there's that arrow with sort of the line on top of it. Now that's the way that your paragraphs are producing text. So either they're starting from the top and going down, they're starting from the bottom and going up, or they're starting from the center and they're sort of building this way from either side. Start from top to bottom, because that'll just be easier for you when you're constructing the different paragraphs or areas where you want to have text. Then spacing is where we were talking about, instead of enter. When it comes to line spacing, stick to something around 1 or 1.1, 1.2. Have a look for yourself. It will depend on the size of the font. It'll depend on the space that you have, or the space that you're allowed to sort of have. Don't go 0.9 or 0.8, because then again, that's way too crowded. So just in your mind, think, is this enough space, but also not too much space, where, like double lines is for, again, an essay where they want to write words in the middle and sort of like help assess as they go. Whereas this is, the words that are there and the words are confirmed, and it's not about grading, what your text is saying, but rather the text is there to complement the images in most cases. And then before paragraph and after paragraph are those point separations. So instead of using enter, you have these less dramatic divisions. So you can clearly see in the middle, there's 3 bodies of text, and those aren't separated by an enter. They're actually separated by 8 points, which makes it a lot easier to see that there's still one body of text, but that there are different subject matters. So that's where that's where it's really effective. And you can see that it's not something new, it's not something different, the reader isn't confused, it's just this natural flow, but it's the next idea. So with all of that, we're going to move into blocking. I hope I'm not going too speedy, but you have the PDF, so hopefully that'll be helpful for you. Now, in terms of blocking, what I mean is the way that you're dividing up your page. When it comes to photography, there's a rule of thirds. So when you look at this image, there's an obvious division of thirds in this, where you have sort of the sea, and you have that line of sand, and then on the other side you have the dunes, and then you have the sand and water, sort of that big, beautiful showstopper in the middle. Rules like that, or the way of dividing, is a really effective way when you're sort of moving into this and you don't entirely know where to place things or how to keep them all consistent and on the same sort of lines and on the same sort of divisions. So thinking about this rule of thirds, it can also be used in, so you have it in horizontal and you can have it in vertical as well. So you can create sort of divisions. And this is always, as much as there's sort of some rules around it, there's always a matter of personal preference with that. To me, a 3x4 is a really useful one, but then it'll depend on how big your poster is or how much space you have. And then it'll also just kind of matter on personal preference of how you want to divide things. And this one, they're rules, but they're sort of a general idea to help you start to understand how to divide a page up. So in this case, you've got that one big image, and then you've got the title of the project, and everything's aligned and everything is set up so that there's a lot of space, but then there's also clarity in the way that you're dividing this up. And this is really, really useful, not necessarily in one single poster, but it's extremely useful when it comes to the design of a portfolio or the design of a document, where you have all of these guides and margins for yourself, where if you're going into another page, or you're doing multiple pages for a single project, then you have those same lines. And so the texts and the images are living within these same grids. So it makes a lot of sense in terms of the consistency, again, between one page to the next. So it feels like it's all the same project. It feels like it's all the same construction, and the basics are all there. So instead of being distracted by the way it's built up, you're actually looking at the content, and you feel sort of that foundation is already there for you, and it's supporting you and saying, this is the area where you'll be reading. This is the area where you'll be looking at images. You shouldn't expect something askew, because everything is just clear and consistent and regulated for you. Again, in this case, you might want to add in a couple images, and then you'll have the title of the project, you'll have some blank space. That being said, one of the things that seems to be off with this is that we're not really respecting the idea of breathing. So everything feels actually quite tight. And if you take the grid off, well, this doesn't look good. And that's mainly because we haven't listened to the rules of what we should be abiding by, and that it's not really breathing, it's not having a lot of space, and you're not prioritizing the overall effect. Instead, you're just trying to shove these big images, you're trying to put these and lock them in place. And that's where some of your own leeway and some of your own common sense in some ways, common sense in the way that you're refining it over the course of design projects, but it becomes this very common sense feeling, this idea. And so you might want to give a bit more of a generous margin around it. You might not necessarily respect that grid, but about where you want things. You want things to align together, and that's where the real quality comes in of your understanding of the grids and what they're doing. You want them to be a basis to help you construct these pages, but then you also have to take a step back and say, well, is this achieving what we want it to? Is there clarity in the image? Does it feel nice and big and breezy and have a lot of empty space so that you can appreciate the title, appreciate the description, but then you're not overwhelmed by too many photos, and you've just got this one big photo that has its space, that has clear white border around it, because that's just nice and visually simple. You're really blocking it in through that negative space, which is the unused space. One of the ways that blocking becomes really, really important, especially in design projects, is when you're using, let's say, mood boards, or you're giving the essence of a project. Now, this could be the image that you choose to say, I'm designing maybe furniture. Maybe you're designing furniture. And you saw this image and you thought, like, yes, this is what's going on today. This is the effect I want to provide. This is the look I want to give. And so you've got this beautiful chair, and it's got these specific lines, these materials, these colors. You've got the concrete in the back. You've got the plant. You've got the pot. But realistically, the problem with that is this is a very nice photo. And if your sketches or if your design isn't as nice as this, then you've already lost the battle, because, well, you're presenting something and saying, this is beautiful, and everyone's agreeing, and they say, yes, this is exactly what we want. And then what you provide is below that as a benchmark. So you've sort of failed the brief in that way. So to protect yourself from things like that, again, it's just blocking. It's focusing more specifically and saying, well, what do I want to provide as an idea? It's not about the chair itself. It's not about the space or the way it's organized. So all I really want to showcase is, that suede, the green of the plant, the lines in the metal. And you can see in a way that it is a chair, but you're letting people's imagination go from these materials or these ideas and then applying them to your solution, rather than looking at this as a solution and then comparing it against yours. So in this case, you are really telling sort of that story through the colors and materials without revealing too much, and making it a lot easier for yourself to defend your claims afterwards. So on that note, I want you to comment in the chat about what you think this image is trying to say. Let's say it was in a project, it was part of sort of the process and the images that it provided. And where do you think this would sit? And what do you think it's trying to communicate as an idea? Yeah, that's a great start. The idea of teamwork. You clearly got it. So, and then where do you think they are in the stages? Is this the final design? Is this the first steps? Yeah, so prototyping. And prototyping is more often, if you divide it in sort of like 4 main stages of a design project, prototyping is usually like the 3rd step. So they're already quite far along. There's a lot of structure. They know what they're doing. They're quite confident in it, and they're working together, and that's what they're trying to demonstrate. So why in the world do I see some red lockers that are distracting in the background? Why are there bags there? Why is there a snack? Like, why is there food there? Why is there a water bottle? Why do we need to see their faces? That's all very distracting. So instead, something more useful to say, if we're really pushing the idea of teamwork and prototyping, then a clear image of that is taking the same photo, but just focusing on that. And I'll go back to the last page because there was a little extra comment. And this is something that I tell my students in UN01, that like, as your AL, I really shouldn't have an opinion about how tidy your room is. So it's the idea that if you are showing a photo of your hand, or you're showing a photo of like a prototype, I don't need to see the rest of your desk. I don't need to see your room. I don't need to have an opinion about like your family's decor or your personal decor. You're trying to communicate a very clear idea about either a project, a sketch, a prototype. So it's all about putting that focus and saying, there are multiple hands at work together. There's a project, and it's clearly at the prototyping stage. And yes, Nola, it is a school setting, and it is sort of useful to show that in the sense of this photo. But if it is a project for school, then it's always going to be a school setting. So it always instinctively has that. So you want to remove all of the variables that we do know and say, this is what's specific about this image. This is what I want you to focus on. Now we're going to move into content, which I think is sort of the last section of this. And we're going to have an exercise in here, so it's really exciting. Oh, and it actually starts now. Ooh, how exciting. OK, so I'm going to put in the chat a version of this. So this image, oh, I'm going to put both of them in. So this image, this page has different images. It has the description, it has the title of the project, it has the name of the designer, and it has a photo of the designer. So I want you to, given what we've talked about, and given the idea of really selling it through the image, being able to reorganize all of these onto the page or onto a page and make those critical decisions of what needs to be showcased in the forefront, and then what's sort of a background or what's a complement to it. And you may also find that you'll be deleting things, or you'll be using something as a full background, or well, maybe you shouldn't. That's a bit of an answer, but like, don't use any of these as the full background, because we talked about it always being a white background. But okay, so I put these in, so you'll be able to download them and then just take a screenshot afterwards. So we'll take like maybe 5 minutes just to look at this, and you don't need to be too specific about the alignments or about where things, how like perfectly set up everything is, but try to give the general idea of what this should look like given what we've talked about and given the like core concepts. And I'm going to drink some water in the meantime. Oh no, I can't download. Oh no. What? Georgie, what's happening?
I have no idea. Let me see if I can figure it out.
You don't want this. Non-OU users can't access the SharePoint files. No. How do we resolve this? Do you have their emails, Georgie? Can I send them to you? Permissions thing. Yeah, it's probably because you're all guests, isn't it? So we're going to try to...
Yeah, if you email me, Max, sorry,
That's fine.
Myself.
Georgina.
I will email everyone.
Perfect. So I've just sent them to you. Send anyways. Good. So they're over to you. Send them to everyone.
Yeah, when they arrive. Yeah. This is one of those times when things nothing ever happens quickly.
I have the same problem as Tia with the PDF. Oh, is the PDF not working either? Oh, I'll send you that too, Georgie.
Okay. So far, let me go out and in again in case. Is it quite a big file, Max?
No, they shouldn't be anyways. Okay, info. Oh, they're a little big. They shouldn't be that big. No, they're like 8 megs. It's not terrible.
No.
Okay, hold on. What's the thing file?
Or the other thing would be to put it on Google Drive.
I'm going into WeTransfer right now.
Okay.
I agree. Add files. Test poster, and load as PowerPoint. Open. Get a link. Well, I'm glad you guys think that this is going well. It's just downloading them on WeTransfer. I should have done. I thought this was all going to work. I tested it all, but yeah, I guess
it's the guest thing.
The security settings, isn't it?
It's annoying. You kind of stuffed either way, basically, because
you prepare everything thinking.
Yeah. Right, I've got this. I could, right, if I copy.
Thankfully, this is just sort of a quick exercise. I don't want you guys to overthink this.
Right, I just got to find
Yeah, I
everyone's.
just need a decent project. Yes, that's the tough one. You can have a million ideas and think like, oh, I don't actually. That's going to be part of the like last recommendations of either you don't have a decent enough project or you don't have enough photos of a good project. Ugh, that one always hurts. You think, I'm fine. I've got enough photos. I've taken some sketches. I've looked at some things. And then in reality, you go through all your images and you think like, oh, there is not enough stuff. There's not enough photos. There's not enough content, or it's not good enough. Okay. So copy that. So hopefully this will work as well. So this is a WeTransfer file. Hopefully you can access it. And it has
And
everything.
I've also hopefully just forwarded your email to me. So one way or another.
They'll have access to it. And then hopefully everyone knows how to screenshot. If not, just take like a JPEG image and then transfer it in. Hopefully that should work. People should be able to share their images. Excellent. Yeah. Perfect. People have it. So just take a few minutes. We'll look back at them in like 4 minutes at like 8:12. Just throw them in as JPEGs or as screenshots. And it's just about thinking about the grids, thinking about the compositions, about letting things breathe, letting them have enough margins, enough space, and which ones should be the priorities, and then just presenting that. I also purposefully took one in French because, I mean, I don't expect a lot of you to speak French, which is for the best. You're not attached to any of this content. So just like, okay, well, this is obviously a body, done. And you can make those quick decisions. Right, so you've got about like 1 more minute, maybe 90 seconds. So just, again, go by the feeling, think about what you've just talked, like we've just talked about it. It's super fresh, just throw it in. And for those who may not have noticed, there's two copies of it. So there's doubles of all the images. So if you delete one by accident, just grab it from the other page. Right, less than a minute now. Should hopefully see some screenshots coming through soon. You just, yeah, just drag it in. Oh, amazing, it's starting. Ah, Steph, well done. This looks great. You're coming along. Oh la la. Wait till, okay, you've got like 30 seconds, throw it in. Just take a little screenshot, save it as a JPEG, whatever you need to do. Well, I'm happy you got the chance to have another look at it. It's come a long way in 7 years. I feel like dragging and dropping and moving things around is a lot more streamlined. We've got 3. I'll wait till at least like 6 of them come through, and then we'll keep going. If you want, Luke, just go into the file and then print. And then in that, you can either save as PDF, you can, instead of printing, you can save it as a PDF or as a JPEG, or you can just, I think there's an export button as well. So you can just export as, JPEG, and then just send in the image. Also, Luke, if you're using a Mac, the screenshot system, function is the Alt, Command, and 4, and it'll give this little pane, and then you can just click and screenshot. And then for Microsoft, I'm not sure, maybe someone.
Unless you have the screen, there's a little screenshot utility, Maxim, which is really useful. It sits in my dockle, and you just have to press any key. It's really great.
Oh, perfect. Oh, yes. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we've got 3, 4, 5. We got 5. I'll wait for one more, and then we can have a look at them. Excellent. So I want to say that I think, Stephen, yours looks fantastic. If you click on Stephen's, it'll open up, and you'll notice that, again, the principles of letting things breathe is definitely there. There's a good idea of alignment. I'm sure with just a little bit more time, the image on the left would have been aligned with all of the text as well. The name is there, the text is there, and it's not spending, it's not dragging on. It's respecting the 8 to 14 words per line. And then there's sort of the very big detail on the product as the main feature, and then the image of what that looks like as a bigger effect, sort of to tell the story as well. Then if we look at, let's say, steps, here there's more images that are used, which is great. You have sort of the full range of the products, and then you have a day view of what it looks like, and then the night view of what it looks like. So that's a really great way of having them one beside, one on top of the other, gives that direct comparison, which is really great. There is missing the name. That's a little detail, and then there is sort of some thinking to be done about how many words per line are being used. there might be the need to either cut it or split it into sort of 2 paragraphs. But again, that is just a very quick, easy, simple thing. But already, like, it's looking really clean. It's looking really clear. There's really great alignment. And then just like a little sort of pro tip, I suppose, is the spacing between different images. So let's say there's like, we're still on Steph's submission. So you've got the product range and you've got the 2 other images, but the spacing between the 2 image, the day image and night image, is different to the spacing between those images and the product range. And if those 2 were the same sort of widths, then that would make it a lot more, that little bit more cohesive. Then
Maxine, can you unmute yourself? You're muted.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, I've been typing away in the chat, but you didn't see that probably. So sorry,
no.
needed to interrupt you.
Sorry, I said leave, and then oh, God, you've missed all of that. So I was just looking at Luke's and saying that there's some clarity that needs to be put. It's nice that everything has its own space versus the original photos or the original version, but there is sort of some aligning to do and some sort of editing to do. However, it does sort of reminisce of a lot of Instagram campaigns that are coming out now and a lot of like Japanese style imagery. So there's a lot of like this kind of haphazard images happening. It doesn't have like a super constructed look. The same as like the cover of this is a little bit, yeah. The construction, there isn't like clear lines happening. So there is that gets a little bit advanced, but it is still, it's still like a look right now. So it is a way of like communicating ideas. The trick of this exercise, Luke, is actually that, as designers, we do have to make those choices of editing and like removing things and resetting them, or just saying like, let's scrap it. Yes, I worked for hours and hours and hours on this render and it looks beautiful, but it's not doing anything more for me. So I think I actually have to let it go, and like, it's really tough, but you have to make those decisions and say like, no, that's not helpful right now. So just going back to our presentation, because I still think it's up and you can see it. I'm going to just provide a couple. I created like 2 examples in different formats. So the first one here is quite close to what a lot of you have done. It's got, the text that's there. It's got this big beauty shot image, and then it's got some details on the side and some different views, just like I think it was Steph who had done it, of that day and night, one beside the one on top of the other, to have that close relationship between the two. And then I chose to put her face a little bit smaller right beside the image. It's sort of in the corner. It's not obstructing too much, because otherwise, as you start organizing the page around, that's a really distracting color. It's a really distracting sort of image that goes outside of the realm of all the other ones. So you do have to think about those color consistencies in that way. And then in another example, you don't always have to stick to either landscape or portrait. You can go with some more unconventional sizes, like a square poster. And in this case, you have that big beauty shot of everything that's going on, and then you have these sort of different little sneak peek looks at what else is there. That's often used for more sort of descriptive projects, and then it gives you a lot more room to start talking about your product or some of the details when you don't have the chance to showcase it through the image. That's sort of prominent in like service design and stuff, but it remains the same. You've got a lot of empty space, and you've got a lot of like room for the images to breathe. They have their own spaces, they have their own areas. And in this case as well, you could also, like, oftentimes it'll happen that you have to like thank a client or like a manufacturer or participant in some respect. So you do have to put it sort of like in the bottom corner, and that also gives it quite a finished look. So those are just two examples. I think that you've all done some really great examples of that. It's just a matter of continuing in the same respect and sort of sticking again to just use these rules as your baseline and stick to them wholeheartedly. And then from there, you can start cheating and like looking around and doing things sort of that are more like this. Once you've understood the principles and your eye is trained to the right kind of spaces, the right kind of like images and setups. So just as an overview of what we've talked about, when it comes to editing, like we've just seen, you may have, like on the left, this is just a bunch of the images that you have, but then you do have to reconstruct them in a way, like on the right, where you'll resize some images, you'll put more focus on different things, you'll crop them so that you're focusing more on something. So that goes back to the idea of blocking, where you're putting big focus on maybe it's the material or the details or the colors, and so you put a big focus on that rather than giving the entire big image. Then avoiding cliches. Now this may be a little bit controversial to some of you, but let's say you have like an eco-sustainable water bottle. The reality is it doesn't need to be green. It doesn't need to have a tree in the background. It doesn't even have leaves on it to explain that it does have some sort of environmental resolution. You don't need to be throwing it in people's faces. You don't need to use all of this. And like this is sort of a trend that happened in the early 2000s, and like it's still happening now, of like greenwashing, where you use the word eco or you use the word sustainable, and like sustainable in business means like nothing. All it means is that it can maintain itself at a specific level. So a business is sustainable when it has the outputs and inputs, it has the resources to like produce the stuff, and it has the money, and it's like keeping afloat. It's sustainable. So like when you see the word sustainable, although it does have a new definition to it or a new perspective to it of like environmental impact, it's just a little bit risky. So all you want to be doing is being a lot more honest about what your product is or what you're actually doing, and you're just saying it's a water bottle with like low impact manufacturing, and you might provide some specifics to that. And remember that that image is worth like everything. People should understand that it's sustainable through either the materials that you're using and the like detail that you provide of that, or maybe it's the manufacturing process that you have an image of, and it just very, very clearly comes through in a clean image. So we're going to go to some even more maybe controversial ideas. So things like sustainable, collaborative, innovative, and like synergy, like whoa. They, as designers, these are some terms that, yes, are used, like oftentimes they're used in like research with these very robust definitions to them. And what you find is that, like collaboration, for instance, is really tough. Like proper collaboration means you're spending, almost half your time keeping everyone up to date and keeping like the same frames of mind. And it's just a lot of work. And the same with like innovative, these words were sourced from sort of like design ideas, but then they got picked up really quickly from in like marketing or in business to like showcase something and really like push it to the edge. Like cutting edge was one of those words in like 2002, 2003 of like everything was cutting edge design. Like, what does that mean? Or like state of the art. Is your product really innovative, or is it simply maybe it's new, maybe it's revised, maybe it's improved, maybe it's optimized? And that is a lot clearer for people, and it feels a lot more honest as a designer, because we're sort of on the back end of products. We're developing these ideas or developing these solutions, and we're providing them to clients. But afterwards, it's sort of the client's job to sell them in terms of like marketing of it. But we need to be as honest as we can and saying, we've coordinated with people, or we've worked as a team on this, or we've consulted with so-and-so or whichever company. Saying that you collaborated with everyone, well, it's not really honest and it's not really true. And it's selling, if you did properly collaborate, or if you say you collaborated and you didn't, and someone in that room knows what collaboration is and sort of tests you on it, then all of a sudden, you kind of look like a liar, or it kind of looks like you haven't done your job fully, even though you're selling this idea. The same goes for sustainable. It's one of those cliche words, and maybe it's just about the manufacturing, maybe it's about the emissions output, maybe it has like low impact for whatever that means, or maybe it's just like locally produced. And that feels a lot more honest and a lot more real than saying that it's sustainable. And the same goes with synergy. Synergy is one of those wild words that like people love, but I mean sometimes it's just like you didn't create synergy between two teams. You just like worked across two teams, and like that's it. That's all it needs to be, because you're not trying to sell the thing. You're being honest about what you've done. And then finally, like let the images speak for themselves. So we've talked about this quite a bit across this all. This is a project that someone did at my old design school that I was sort of supervising, and off the bat, you can tell exactly what this is without even having to need a description. You've got the product, you have the context, you have sort of the idea of scale, and you have, I mean, it's a little bit cheeky, but you have the name sort of there, sort of floating in the water as well with it. And in this way, when you look at some of the descriptions that they have these photos, and then they have just a couple lines, and those lines come in complement of the image. So it's sort of explaining the image and then enhancing, what is there. So it's two distinct things. The images need to speak for themselves, and all the text is doing is either supporting or refining what can't be illustrated. So with all of that in mind, there's just a couple final points that I want to mention. First of all, we've talked about all of these things, but lots of images during the process. Take as many images as you can. This moment you start a TMA, take photo. Like TMA, I think it's 2, where you're designing like with people. Take photos like of around, like people talking together. Take photos of them discussing. Take photos of them arguing. Take photos of them working together, their hands sort of like, sometimes it's super fake, but like you have their hands working on something, you have someone like drawing on one side, and you have the image, and you have the papers, and you have all sorts of like shots, and take as many as you can throughout the entire process, because it will save you so much time, so much worry, and so much effort when you get to the end and you have to showcase your project. Keep in mind, again, clear backgrounds and high quality images. Keep in mind that, like we did with blocking, you may take a photo of, let's say like this, and you'll have the photo with the background, but then you need it to be high quality enough to zoom into this, or even to zoom into sort of this specific area. So you need to keep some high quality images, get yourself a hard drive, because your laptop probably won't handle the amount of memory that you need, but just keeping all of those images and being able to record them and have them on hand when you design it, when you decide to draw out that poster, or you make a portfolio, or you have to reflect on a project you did 10 years ago. Remember that communicating is all about, giving an effective idea, being super efficient in the way that you're communicating. And stick to the rules for now. It's all about learn the rules, learn them well, and then from there you can start to break them, but not until like at least the end of your degree, at least until like your first couple of years in practice, because they want to see that clear, consistent communication, and it will just be a godsend for the longest time. And like you look at, if you go on different design schools Instagram pages, you can look at the RCA, you can look at my old university, the School of Design at the University of Montreal, you look at ECAL, you look at Nancy. These are all these really, really big universities in design. And look at the way that they're constructing the images. Look at the posters. It is this. It's clean white backgrounds, clear, nice, well-cropped shots of a human scale and a product. And you'll start to see what makes a good design image. Then more. Be very, like as an AL, I'm extremely greedy. I want more ideas. Do 15 sketches, do 1,500 sketches. Like it's a bit of an exaggeration, but do a lot of different ideas, do a lot of different tests. If you don't know how to design your poster, try it 4, 5, 6 different ways, because you'll start feeling it, and you'll start as you develop these ideas or as you work on them, you start refining, clearly seeing what is the final design you want to produce, or what is the like clean look that you want to have. Then there's the idea of measure twice, cut once. It goes to the same thing of, sometimes printing posters, especially like in, when you have to physically print things, like an A0 can be like 80, 90 pounds. So you want to make sure that all of your font sizes are correct. Everything looks good. There are no errors. All of the images are nice and clean. They're all well aligned. You zoom in, you spend hours just like zooming in, zooming out, making sure that like everything looks nice and clean, because once you print it or once you submit it, that's it. Like it's gone into the world. And then as you start to work on this, you'll sort of develop that eye, right? That sort of refined feeling. If it doesn't look right, that probably means it isn't. As you're becoming a good designer, or you're developing that ability or that aptitude to see things, sometimes you don't know how to express it, but that something's not right. So just copy, when it comes to like poster design, as we were doing in the PowerPoint or in Keynote, take whatever copy you're at and then just duplicate it and then test whatever the issue is you have. Maybe it feels too crowded, so like delete an image and then reorganize. And just, again, if it doesn't look right, probably isn't. So just do it until it feels good, until everything looks like it's where it should be. You don't feel uncomfortable when you're looking at the image because everything's where it should be, and it feels like this really solid foundation to the content that you're trying to show. And sometimes this is a really helpful thing for people. Think designer and client. Think that you are the designer and whoever you're submitting this to is your client. Now, they've hired you or they have selected you as one of their candidates, and you need to present something that they're satisfied with. So if you reflect that, oh, well, that image doesn't look really good, maybe it needs to be a bit brighter, maybe the prototype I should have taken a shot from a different angle, then do it. Because as much as you can explain to a client like, oh, well, I meant to, or like, oh, I wanted to, but I didn't, they don't care. They really don't care. Like, they will move on to the next person. Or if you're looking at a portfolios, when it comes to companies, like I consulted with Foster and Partners who are in London for a little bit, and we were working on like the stacks of portfolios, and they get like hundreds and thousands of portfolio submissions for the jobs that open up. And you've got about 10 seconds to impress them. So your image needs to be perfect or as good as you can make it, because if it isn't, then, I mean, sort of tough luck, because it's quite competitive, and you need to express yourself really well through the images that you're producing. Just like if you did an essay, you wouldn't submit the draft even though all the words are there. You wouldn't submit your handwritten draft or the one with all the comments. You clean it all up and you make sure that that's a perfect essay when you submit it to like a professor, or you submit it to a course, or you submit it to a client or your boss. The same goes for design. You need to have, if the image doesn't feel right, then consider it sort of the draft image, and it needs to be replaced with something that's cleaner. And then the final one is something that tormented, well, it still to this day torments every student at the old school I used to teach at. We had this one supervisor who I absolutely loved, but she would say, you would present sort of your idea and you'd say like, okay, it works this way. You'd give her all the details, everything looked great. And she'd look at you and she'd say, très bien, recommence, which essentially boils down to like, very good, now do it again. Because the logic behind that is, if you've done it really well the first time, then the chances are the next version that you're going to present me is going to be even better. So it's about, pushing yourself and saying, yes, this looks good. Can I do it better? Or like, let's restart and say, when it comes to, let's say, the poster design, you do it all and you say, okay, well, something's not right, or this looks good, but can I make it better? And you just do another blanket. You take a blank document and you move things over again and you just start again, because like for the longest time, it's the quantity over the quality. If you spend all of your time sort of painstakingly looking at a poster, a single one, then you're going to waste a lot of time. Instead, you're sort of sculpting this piece of clay in that you've got the general idea and you're sort of pounding it into a vase, but then you don't start looking at the final details until you've reshaped and shaped it until something general looks really good. And it's the same way for posters. If it doesn't look quite right, then don't focus on like the small details yet. Do it until you have the general idea and it feels good, and then you can start looking at the things that make it quality. So that's it, everyone. That's all I had to say.
Thank you so much, Maxime. That's been absolutely brilliant. I'm sure you've already had people telling you how brilliant it was. So that's really good. And it's so great that we're going to be able to share it with people on YouTube and Facebook. So I think we should give him a round of applause if anyone's got their mic open.
Are there any questions? Are there any issues that you may have? Because like that can always happen as well. As much as someone thinks like, oh well, yes, this is some good ideas, but like I don't agree. And like if that's the case, I'd love to hear it as well.
Hi.
Hello. I heard someone.
Hello. Yes. I'm actually doing the EMA for 317, so it's like the big degree level project, and my final thing is to do a 20 or so slide PowerPoint presentation. Would the same kind of layout guidelines that you've given us work for 20 different slides as opposed to one final poster?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you stick with the same idea of like consistency, where one of the great tricks that I use. So I'm going to just share the presentation that I just did again. So we're going to go into this. So you can all see it's still on like final points, right? So when you look at the overview, everything has sort of, I use the same color across all of these. So it's always got this sort of vibe. And then when it comes to, different sections, content and blocking, they're all at the same spot. All I did was, duplicate it and then go into, a new section, because I had already set up that everything was going to be right aligned, everything's all the same size. So then you're just moving that into another position and you're recycling the same, the same slides to keep that really consistent, and you're using the same colors, the same sizes. I think as a good rule of thumb in some cases, like this is sort of something that I often use, of like the big titles will be in 140 in bold, and then 40 is sort of a good size when it comes to PowerPoint presentations. When it gets a little bit smaller than that, you can already tell that like, if you go into 18, then, I mean, you can't really read that. And so you've sort of failed in a way the brief of effectively communicating your ideas. So just keep these nice big texts, and then keep the same images. Like when it comes to this, it's the same color that we have in here. You just give yourself a couple basic principles that you want to maintain, and then you're done really. Like the work does itself. Then you just plug and play.
Great, thanks very much.
Oh yeah, and don't be too wordy. That like this is a point I talk to my students about as an AL, but there's this like really good practice of knowing when it's appropriate to use first person and third person. And you'll see that across, like an entire project, but also in slides. When you say, it's the difference between I thought that the use of red would be a really good color as it expresses this. Instead, choose to be third person, very objective about it, and say the color is red because of this reason. And that puts the onus always on the project, and it never puts it back on you. So you're never being criticized as a person. It's always the project that's being criticized, or the choices that you've made that are being criticized, rather than saying like you were wrong to use the color red. Instead, someone saying red may not have been the best color for this design. I think that's like a big one when it comes to submissions. Are there any other questions?
I have a question, if you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
So my question's about when your renders are very good. And I was just wondering, when your project hasn't quite gotten to that stage, so say you aren't able to do really good renders, or you weren't able to make a final prototype, does your advice differ in terms of the way you present your images if they aren't up to that sort of quality or standard?
So I might be able to open something up that will clarify that. No, I want to go into this. I think this has it. So I think if I open this should show, it should be a bit of an explanation for that. So sometimes, it's not even about the final project. It's like no one cares about the final beauty shots, because you may not be selling that as your idea yet. You might just want to be demonstrating the process, or you want to be demonstrating some sketches. And so let's see, I can move this over actually. This can be really useful. Sometimes when you don't have like perfect images or perfect ideas, then like you can have something like this where you put some images together and you have an entire page where it feels like a single thing, and there's nothing, your things might not be finished, but you're giving this overview of sort of the work that you're up to. And that can be just like a really nice and clean way of presenting it, because it's all about like the cleanliness of your images, right? Or the cleanliness of like how you're presenting it. So in these cases, you can like patch things together so that it doesn't feel too official. The same goes with, let's say, like this one here. I think you can still see what I'm doing. So this one here, like, these aren't like high quality images, but they're sort of this clear work in progress. So sometimes you want to like sell that as an idea and say, instead of trying to like demonstrate these beautiful images, because you're not like a sketch god, that's fine. You're giving this general idea of some of the concepts that you're working on, or some of the ideas that you're working in a very work in progress style that it doesn't feel super clean, and that's fine because it's consistent in that way. So it's all about like the message that you're trying to send. And if you have a sketch that doesn't look that great on an image that isn't coming out super good, then maybe it's just a matter of doing it in more of a sort of makeshifty way that gives it a little bit more of a defense, instead of saying like, oh, I tried to present this as this beautiful final render. Instead, you're saying, no, this is just where I'm at right now. This is sort of like what's going on in sort of an informal style.
Thank you.
I've got a question, if that's okay, Maxim.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. So you've laid out some of the principles for setting out poster on a page.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering about where you might be working on several pages in a document, if you've got any principles there in terms of the relationship between those pages.
Mm-hmm.
So are there similar principles for sort of maybe sort of how they breathe together and you know, basically just try and understand the relationship between a bit more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Let me see if I have some examples of that. I'm trying to see. I've a little bit limited on the amount of space that I have on this laptop, but I don't think I can. But you want to just sort of set up in the same, you know, let's say we're looking at this. We can do it really quickly here. So you can set up sort of like a table like this, and you set up your margins, and you put everything. And so you can, there's like master slides and master lines and stuff. But maybe we want, no, that feels right. And then we'll do just 2. No, we're going to do 4. So then you'll have sort of, oopsies. We'll lock that. Lock that. So then you're going to, why can't I move it? No, that's fine. So you're going to have, let's say, like all of your text is going to end up being here, and you'll use like all of these same principles. I'll erase that. You can have everything that's, you know, up here, or you can have it sort of working from this side. You know, you'll have maybe introduction like that. And then we'll go and grab some text from Fonta. Grab this. And we'll go back up here. So then we'll give ourselves a little bit of space because it's always nice to have a little margin. And then you can have, of course, I didn't respect my own rule. So then you can have that sort of set up, and we'll put it in white just for clarity. And then you'll use the same principle again, and maybe you'll put like, you know, paragraph 1. And then you'll do the same thing down here. So then you're keeping like the same principles. Okay, and then maybe all of your images always go over here in these blocks. So then you've got the same sort of principles. And then when you go into a new page, you might have, you know, the continuation of your text there, and then you'll have maybe you want a bigger image, so then you can have it sort of going across. Like that. And you'll delete that. Actually, that doesn't quite work. So then you'll have, so you're always keeping the same principles. And then if we unlock this and unlock that, then there's flow between these pages. So because you're using the same sort of baseline, it obviously feels like it's the same principles. So it's the same flow across the document, and that'll really save you. And then, you know, of course, you know, all of your images might not always be here because you have different sizes, but you're sticking to the same basic rules. So it feels like it's always the same sort of principles. And then, you know, maybe with that, you also start with your title of the project in bold, and let's say 140. It's probably a bit too big. Oopsies. But then, you know, you're basing every, oh, what happened? There we go. You'll start it here. And then maybe you'll have a little bit of a mini description there with your little summary. You know, so you have the title of the project, you have your summary, all of that, and then when you go into the body, then you're keeping all of those same principles and you're keeping it consistent. So you're basically just copy pasting and duplicating these pages and putting the new content in. You know, the great thing to think about when you're doing a document is that you should write everything in like Microsoft Word or, you know, in like Pages, write everything out, and then from there make those decisions afterwards on how it should all be set up in the boxes, because it'll really be just like, you know, fill in the boxes or like plug and play, and you don't have to think about it afterwards, and it stays really clean and consistent.
Cool, thank you. I think it was more maybe a case of just trying to make sure you've got enough variety between the layout, so that say.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So so you don't have, say, like 2 pages that sort of have a very similar layout, and then page 3 or 4 you've got something totally different. So is there that kind of
totally
that kind of flow? Is that where breathing is a concept when it comes to that kind of relationship between those pages?
Yeah. Well, that starts going into breaking the rules a little bit, but then you might want to have these ideas, but then afterwards it could be about maybe one of your pages is just this big beauty shot, and that voila. So then you have sort of maybe this is like a introduction to what you were talking about, and then you have some basic principles, and then in the next page you have this big image, and then afterwards you have, let's duplicate that, and then afterwards you'll have maybe a couple of things there, and you don't have to it's about, as long as you keep sort of the same basic principles, it should be totally fine, because you're sticking to the same visual language. It's always, you have the words as a language, and then you have the visuals as a language. So just use those basics, and these two sort of have very similar languages, in the sense that they're using the same principles. They're using the same text, they're using the same sort of general sizes, and you have these different images. So using the same margins, using the same divisions between images can be a really helpful way of saying, this is the same project. And stick to the same things for a single project, and the same fonts, the same sizes, because otherwise it's just going to get a bit confusing for the reader.
Great.
I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. No.
It's a little bit tough without the example.
Yeah. No, yeah, that makes sense. I was just thinking of it in terms of grammar there, I suppose. As long as you've got the grammar there, that kind of, the sentences flow from that. That makes sense in my own head. I know what I'm talking about in my own head. So, yeah. Brilliant. Thanks for that.
Steph asked what software. This is just Keynote, so this is the basic software in Apple, but it has all the same functionalities and a few less than PowerPoint. So for the longest time, you don't actually need to use Photoshop or InDesign or anything like that. InDesign is super helpful when you're doing a book, because it keeps the same rules. So that's really great. You can have master slides. But when it comes to little things like this, I haven't had the Adobe suite for a few years now, only because I haven't needed them for that kind of software editing. So I've just used these because it gives me exactly what I need to. It's with shapes, you have if you need a tree, it's got trees. So you're just using these basic shapes, and then you're just constructing different things with them, and then that's it. Yeah, well, if you have InDesign and it works, then more power to you of continuing to use InDesign, because it is the more sort of sophisticated, the more professional version. But the thing is, I work as a consultant, and oftentimes I have pretty hefty non-disclosure agreements, which means that I have to use their own sort of software, or their own laptops and stuff, which means that I can't just download Adobe. And as a consultant, you can't, there's a difference between being a student and using a cracked version of Adobe versus being a consultant and using an illegal version. So that doesn't work. So you have to, obviously use what they have. And I've worked in companies that they want you to use SolidWorks, and the only version they have is SolidWorks 2013, which is sort of a rendering software. And you just kind of got to work with the 2013 version. You got to say well, it's not ideal, but here we are. And you work to the, that's why I like to think, work with the basics, know how to use the basics really well, because they are really powerful, softwares. And then if you can, Adobe is this incredible monster of like a software. It has so many functionalities, but most of the time, like for sort of a novice or someone at this stage of just like presenting a general idea for a presentation, like you don't need that kind of software. You don't need those specifics, and you can make do with, this. And it even, so like, let's say, you can be a little bit cheeky with some of these things and say like, a tree. You do that, and then you just like use the pen tool. And then you create a little box, and then you fill that box with white, and it doesn't have a border. And then you have like, oops, you bring that to the front, and then you have like your text there, and then all of a sudden it's like nice and cute and edited. And like sometimes you can group these things so that they move around together. But once you learn the ropes on a system, then like it can be really easy to do that kind of like advanced editing without actually doing anything advanced. Yeah, are there any final questions? Anything else? Yeah. Great. I think I've held you all long enough. It's time to go enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you so much, Maxime. This was really fantastic, very clear. All what you said, everyone has to do, you've done it just now. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Great.
Lovely. So yeah, we're going to upload and share it with as many people as we can, especially when we come to our design exhibition. I'm sure many will appreciate this little bit of help you gave everyone.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Maxime.
Yeah, well, that's where it came from, looking at the expo images and thinking like,
yeah, we need some
just
work
a few
on
things.
that. Exactly. Perfect. Spot on. Lovely. Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Best of luck, everyone, with your submissions.
Lovely evening.
Yes.
Bye,
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.